So welcome to Art 234 lecture for color theory. So we're going to start off with color systems. So as we looked last week, we have RGB and CMYK. RGB is colors that are illuminating from light as a primary colors of red, green, blue. And CMYK is print colors, cyan, magenta, yellow as the primaries. And as a reminder, we have our classic that we may have learned in grade school is RYB, red, yellow, blue, is what people will traditionally think of when they hear primary colors, and then the secondary colors of green, orange, and purple. Having a good hand on the three different color modes, color systems, will be helpful for the rest of this lecture and this semester. So we're going to go over some color vocab. And these are terms that we will use interchangeably, especially once we start looking at playing with color in either Adobe Photoshop or Adobe Lightroom. So hue, saturation, and value is what we're going to look at first. So hue is a term to describe color. So I say, what's the hue of color? You'll say, oh, it's red or orange. This is like the color name. And sometimes we categorize it in warm and cool colors. And this could be just any color, any tint, tone, shade. Hue is just the name of the color, what you would name it. And you can get fancy with the names. It doesn't have to be the typical red. It could be crimson, scarlet, etc. Saturation is the purity of color. So a fully saturated color is no white, black, or gray. This is the truest form of the color. So when we say something that's more saturated, it's more of the brightest. I'm trying to not use other terms, but it is the most pure color you can get. So there's no other additives coming to it. So if I say red, we think of the red that's in the color systems that we had before when we look at the RGB. Next we have is value. So that's the relative lightness or darkness of a color. So value is just the tone of light to dark. So if you're doing a tonal scale, let's say in drawing class, and you have to start off with white and black and you do each step in between, that's what we're talking about, the value. Value is really clear to understand when we're talking about black and white photography. So if you came from the darkroom course, you really have a good handle on value. Value also translates to color differently, but there is value. So if you're looking at a very dark cyan, say in this photo at the very bottom, or a very light cyan, etc. Next we have is luminance. So it's the absolute measurement of light. Luminance will come in play once we start playing in either Lightroom or Photoshop. It's the intensity of light. It actually can be measured, as you can see, it's CD/ in candela per square meter, which I don't even know what a candela is. But it's the intensity of light that hits the eye after reflecting off an object. So luminance is a reflection of light. And then brightness is our perception of luminance. So we can't measure brightness. I mean, there's a scale in Photoshop and Lightroom for brightness, but it's not like an absolute measurement, say like luminance is. So if you look at a computer screen at the maximum luminance, it looks brighter in a dark room than it would outside in the sun. Think about how a bright room looks when you have lights on, when it's nighttime, versus when you have lights on during the day, or when your phone is adjusting for the brightness for the light that's around you. So these may be familiar: tint, tone, and shade. So tint is anything you add white to a pure color. So you would get sort of this like light yellow as you see when you're thinking of mixing paint. Color is really great to understand when you're working tangibly with mixing colors. So if you do have an opportunity to take the traditional color class, which would be like the painting and drawing one, not necessarily color digitally, it really helps you understand color terminology and how color works. Next we have is tone. So that's anything added to gray. In gray, we're looking at that true neutral. And so it just makes the color a little bit more muted, which makes it not too saturated, and it takes it from something that would be very, traditional, these like pure hues that can look very kindergarten, if you will, to something more mature. Shade is anything you add black to, and it darkens the color. The hue will remain the same, but you don't want to go overboard if you're looking with shades. And we'll definitely get into this a little deeper, and I have a few readings and links, but symbolic color. So this is color with meanings. Now, this may differ based on your culture. So there's symbolic color with religious connotations for different religions. East and West have different connotations of color. There's so many different associations we have with color that really change based on where we are, who we are, what time it is, as in time as in like chronicle time. So it's really fun to think about the psychology of color and how you can use color as a conceptual component, which is really what I want you to think about for this class, is how color can be a really strong conceptual component within your photography, to not just have it color because that's how it was when you saw something, but how color can influence your viewer's experience of the photograph. So now we have color harmony, and this is going to kind of lead us into our first big project for class. So color harmony is the aesthetically pleasing and harmonious color combinations based on the geometrical relationships on the color wheel. And when I say color wheel, we're referring to the red, yellow, and blue color model, is what one would typically think of when we hear the term color wheel. So as we see in this example, we have complementary color wheel, colors that are across from each other, split complementary. So you have one color, and then instead of being directly across, it is the two colors next to it. There's analogous colors, colors that are next to each other in the color wheel, triadic, tetradic, which you create a square, so it's almost like a dual complementary. And then there's square, so kind of, you have two colors that are across from each other in the color wheel. And then you have monochromatic. So complementary colors are pretty basic, and not just like basic, but they're, what's what people think of first when you think of color harmonies. It's colors that are opposite of the color wheel. So we have red and green, purple and yellow, orange and blue. These are really the contrast is really key when you're working with complementary colors. Also, when we think about complementary colors, we can also take it into warm versus cool. I think that is an acceptable form of thinking of complementary colors. And then sometimes I even think complementary colors could step into the CMY RGB color wheel. So you would have cyan and red across from each other. But you can also take these complementary colors even to tertiary colors. So it doesn't have to be these like primary and secondary colors, but you can open up the color wheel to have more nuanced colors. They're really high contrast. When you mix these together, you get the neutral. So that's why there's almost that excitement when these colors touch. I always recommend when you're doing photography with this, let one of the colors be the focus, another one kind of be the foreground. So they can work together, but they don't have to be butting up against each other. And again, I will accept warm versus cool colors as complementary colors. I think that's perfectly fine. So now we have split complementary colors. So it's more nuanced because instead of just being directly across, you have to think of what is exactly adjacent to the complementary color. It gives you more of a blend going on. It's not as obvious that you're trying to do the sort of color harmony, but they're very nice as we look at some of these samples. You know, they have this, I don't know, this sense of fun to it. Analogous colors. These are color schemes that are right next to each other on the color wheel. So it could be different tones of green and yellow, and then we have, you know, violet, indigo, purple, red, orange, blue, not red, orange, blue, but red, orange, yellow, etc. So you can see these color harmonies. I don't know, they're very fun, I think. I think all color is fun, so I don't know why I keep saying that, but there's something about them that kind of lead you into something. I don't know, when I see a photograph that has analogous colors, you know, I think that there's more to the story that it's telling me, and I'm waiting for it, and I like that. It's asking a question, I feel. Triadic colors, so these are, you know, kind of your primary colors or secondary colors. They're sort of, if you were to do a triangle on the color wheel. I think these can be very strong colors. This could be complicated to do because you really just see a lot of, you know, the really strong hues of, you know, what would be your primary or secondary colors. So it's very fun to play with, but maybe kind of hard to execute sometimes. Tetradic colors. So these are sort of, you know, if you do a rectangle, sometimes it'll work if you do a square, but for the sake of this, we'll think about rectangle. It is suggested that you have one main color and then the rest kind of work with the others. Monochromatic, so this is you have one single hue and you have different tints, tones, and shades from that single hue. This is not to be confused with analogous. I think they're very different. So you have to be really conscious when you're thinking about monochromatic and analogous colors. So we're going to think about how color interacts. So if you think about it, we have optical color mixing in this graphic that I found, which really explains it really nicely. So it's how you're not physically mixing colors to create a new color, but you're putting two different hues next to each other that work next to each other, and then they will make this perceptual blend of colors. And this is a theory that was definitely used in pointillism. So we have this George Seurat piece that's at the Art Institute of Chicago. It's a gorgeous piece. It's huge. You could look at it for days. So when we look at it, it's kind of got this like texture to it. But if you look close, it's not just one fluid brushstroke making the colors, but we have tones of colors next to each other to build up that give the illusion of a single sort of color. Here we have high key and low key color. So high key color describes the set of colors that range from mid-tone hues to white. So high key are, if you're looking at this scale, we got that middle gray to white, and low key would be middle gray to black. So the high key is very upbeat, it's positive, and low key can have sort of this dramatic, sort of sultry vibes. Joseph Albers, and if you've taken a traditional color course, he is like the guru of color. So he says, and he thinks a lot about how color is relatively, so it's never seen how it is. So we think about how color is scientifically, the science of color. We really talked about that last week. We talked about that luminance, where we can absolutely measure color. But this is how color appears to those who would have a typical visual spectrum of color. So if you don't have any color blindness or anything like that, this would be a little more difficult. But this is how color works. So in his pieces here, it's how color works next to another color. So we have these little squares, and these are the same hues, the same pigment, everything, but they appear different next to other colors. Or you could have colors that are completely different hues, but they're surrounded by another hue, but they appear the same. So it is our perception of color. It's sort of this optical illusion of color. So we have this site, which will be linked, is the Adobe Color Wheel. So as you can see, we have different color harmonies. So I can say, I want to look something that's analogous. And it'll kind of give me this color harmony, and then it'll give you actually the hex codes that you're looking for. And you can play around. It's kind of giving me this different one. Let's kind of restart. So a monochromatic, you can kind of click around and drag it to say, I need a different monochromatic field. I can look at square, compound, I can look at just shades, complementary. So this is really fun, especially if you're thinking about design, and you can actually save your color palette and import it into, say, Photoshop or Illustrator to get your full color palette. The site also has extract themes. So this is kind of what you'll be doing for our photographic color wheel assignment. So extract color from an image, and you could save it as a color palette. So I have this image, and I'm just going to drag and drop, and I'm going to wonder, what's the color palette of it? So here's my photograph, and it kind of gives me this color theme. So it takes sort of the bold colors and it gives you sort of this color theme out of it. I could use this to build some branding. I can have bright, muted. So it can give me sort of different color moods that I'm looking for, which is pretty cool. Definitely, so I would say this is probably almost like an analogous color theme. So we have yellow, orange, kind of this pinky color, and then the brown is maybe a neutral. And that's kind of what I would expect from this kind of color theme. I would probably want the colors to be a little bit more stand out because the brown is, you know, I don't really see a good color scheme, but this is just an example of how this website works. So I want you to sort of go out and start thinking of color and having fun. Definitely shooting with the color themes as well.